Time to review the front pages of some select national dailies this morning. Welcome to the newspaper review segment on Daybreak. We start, as always, with the front page of the Daily Trust newspaper for today. Starting from the very top, there are some stories regarding the litigations of the 2023 elections. And it says, anxiety in Kano Plateau ahead of appeal court judgments. Remember, in Kano, the tribunal verdict has really shaken the ancient city, or the state rather. But of course, there is more to it because the appeal court is next and it has reserved judgment. And this week, the verdict will come out. Atiku seeks merger of opposition parties to checkmate APC. Okay, I'm aware that IPAC paid him a visit yesterday, so I suppose this is where this story is going to come from. APC itself was a function of a merger, wasn't it? Just in 2014, some 9 years ago. Passengers evacuated as Port Harcourt bound aircraft overshoots runway. Another one, again, what is happening with the aviation industry, you would have to ask. The big story is talking about the president's perspective on the state of the nation. I inherited serious liabilities from my predecessors. I think, he meant to stop at predecessor. But anyway, it is also very true that every other administration inherits assets and liabilities. I mean, that is life, isn't it? Especially in governance. You inherit assets and liabilities. But Nigerians usually hear of the liabilities, not necessarily the assets. So what is the president talking about? Read further on the pages of the Daily Trust newspaper for today. Here are some of the writers. CBN governor says no magic wand for economic crisis. Federal government has run out of ideas, according to economists. Hoarders, speculators responsible for forex crisis. In other news, Navy combs Lagos waters, intercepts boat carrying 90 drums of PMS. We will tap into $2 trillion Islamic finance market, according to the federal government. And just below that, the latest on the labor strike across the country as it cripples activities in Abuja and other states of the country. Union leaders chase out non-compliant workers. BUK suspends examinations. Hospitals, banks, courts remain shut. Partial compliance in Lagos, Rivers, and Oyo. The orientation agency is calling for suspension of the strike. There's more on that on page 27 of the Daily Trust newspaper for today. Let's turn our attention now to the front page of the Punch newspaper for today. Federal government knocks labor strike records partial compliance. This is all over Ajero's alleged assault. And Tinubu not behind attack on Ajero, escalating strike nationwide unreasonable, according to the Attorney General's office. Lagos, Rivers, Kwara, Bauchi, Sean, Labour, Kano, Edo, Delta, Akwa Ibom, others comply. You can see their pictures from Abuja, where workers have had to scale the fence to gain access to their office, and this is at the National Assembly complex. So you can also see Lagos in the picture there, depicting what happened yesterday and what will continue to happen according to the LC going forward. 35 million naira needed to return body of Nigerian student, according to the ministry. What? Oh my goodness. Page 7 has more on that story. Sacked agencies members sue Adeleke, demand 2 billion naira. Page 29 has more on that story. At the very top, over the nameplate, elections over, reform economy now. The Newspaper Proprietors Association of Nigeria tells President Tinubu. CBN extends all naira notes deadline indefinitely. And people are scratching their heads with regards to that court order. The Apex Bank, the Supreme Court of Nigeria, gave an order that extended the validity to December 10. But now the CBN is saying indefinitely, and people are trying to scratch their head to understand what this legally means following this announcement by the CBN. Atiku canvasses merger to oust APC. Well, that is it on the Punch newspaper, the front page of the Punch newspaper for today. Let's take a look at the Nigerian Tribune up next. CBN extends legal tender status deadline for old banknotes. Hoarders, speculators behind, or rather blamed, as Nigeria depreciates, or the Naira depreciates to 850 Naira at NAFEX. And Nigerian woman sets world record for longest wig making. It's become a trend recently where everybody's trying to break or make one record or the other. Page 2 has more on that story. Below the nameplate, labor strike kicks off, and ports, schools, banks, National Assembly complex, others suffer. Train operations also affected. Serious compliance in Edo, Bauchi, Oshun, Kogi, Imo, others. Partial strike in Oyo, Ondo, Kaduna, Benue, Ogun. National grid intact. Supplying bulk electricity to discos, according to the Transmission Company of Nigeria. Reconsider your action, federal government tells workers. And also you can see the picture there of some of those government agencies and institutions being shut down by the action of the organized labor. Once again, below the pictures, we inherited serious liabilities and assets. Well, that's a fair statement. President Tinubu says negotiates multi-billion infrastructure funding with Islamic Bank. All right, let's turn our attention now to the front page of the Guardian newspaper for today. Amcon banks bailout. 1 year after takeover of discos, darkness, liquidity crisis persists. There's a lot more regarding the failures and the challenges in Nigeria's power sector. Again, SEC moves to reduce 190 billion unclaimed dividends. How is it that much unclaimed dividends? So people have just money just lying around that they're not willing to claim. It's on the business page of the Guardian newspaper, and the Securities Commission is looking into that. Zelensky accuses Russia of benefiting from Israel-Hamas war. How is that related? Page 3 of the Guardian newspaper has more on that story. Compliance, defiance as NLC, TUC indefinite strike kicks off. Atiku 6 coalition of opposition parties cautions against slide to one-party dictatorship. And fortifying custodial centers to keep inmates safe, deter would-be attackers. This is a news analysis on the pages of the Guardian newspaper for today. Finally, we're going to look at the Blueprint newspaper for today before we get to the discussion unpacking these stories. So let's take a look at the front page of the Blueprint newspaper for today. The big story says Nigeria will receive significant share of IDB's $50 billion investment for Africa, according to Vice President Mukhtar. Tinubu seeks support on infrastructure, agro-allied facilities, says we inherited serious liabilities, assets from our predecessors. And there's more from that story as the president observes lesser Hajj in Saudi Arabia. You can see him there in the picture, flanked by, public figures from Nigeria and from Saudi Arabia. More on that on page 6. Nigeria's 3.5 trillion naira yearly post-harvest losses worry Action Aid and others. Kogi polls allege manipulation of data on IRF unfounded, according to INEC. Collaboration with Navy restored calm to the Gulf of Guinea, according to JAMO. And labor strike, partial compliance in Enugu, Kaduna, FCT, Ekiti, Kwara, Oshun, Edo, workers obey directive. TCN debunks national grid shutdown. Well, these are some of the stories to follow this morning, and it's time now for us to give you some sort of perspective on some of these top stories. Join us this beautiful, lovely Wednesday, industrial strike-stricken Wednesday, is the one and only Mr. Ben Shevan, former Director News at the Voice of Nigeria. Thank you very much, Mr. Ben, for joining us this morning. I commend you for always finding it possible to come to the studio, regardless whether it's fuel scarcity, whether it's labor strike. You always show up. Thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Yeah, you see, journalism is addictive,
right,
to some people. And sometimes when you are even on holidays, you feel like, oh, you ought to have been.
It's like second nature, isn't it?
Exactly.
Like it's always a part of you.
You know.
Right. You can't turn it off.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk about one particular phenomenon that has become part of our national polity, industrial actions. Give me a sense of what you make about this one. First of all, there's a court order that stopped it, but apparently a court order is not going to stop NLC and the TUC from making a statement that the attack on their president will not go unpunished, so to say.
Now, let's get two things separate here, or separately. The court says, don't, thou shalt not. Now, you went on it. The next thing, which is second, is it has to do with the attack on the president's person. In other words, okay, we are not disobeying the court order, but for the attack on our president, we are going to take that. But how do we separate the two? But if you look at it, the masses are not having it easy, truly. People are just walking, going to their destinations. While you're thinking you're going to find Soko, you reach there, the place is locked up. And one is left to just scratch his head, look at the sky, bite your fingertip and simply shake head. Where do I go to? How can we continuously, what we know is strike, strike, strike. Now, if labor and government felt they should work together for the betterment of this country, and if you look at it, labor and government, they went there because some people elected them. If you are talking of labor, they all were elected by people who felt they should put them there to protect them. You look at government, they all are there in government because they feel like they said in chapter 2 of the Nigerian Constitution, it is a kind of a contract between the electorate and the government. Vote us in, will give you very goodies of life. Now you don't have this. The electorate are now moving to labor to force government to give them what they promised to give them via chapter 2 of the Nigerian Constitution. Because government says, we'll give you protection, we'll give you good life, security, food, promote marriages, promote national unity, we'll give you what you want. You know, so when you look at these general fundamental objectives of the Constitution, government on its part is not doing so much there. So, but why is labor again feeling like okay, can we cut the very life of this government so that we can have the best for?
Do you think, Mr. Ben, you know, the whole motivation around this is emotional instead of logical? Because Nigerians are failing to morally support what is going on because it is only exacerbating an already bad situation. I mean, when markets, when government offices are closed, when courts are closed, when banks are closed, when the oil sector is, you know, disrupted, the supply chain is disrupted. We're already seeing fuel queues across the federal capital. I mean, all in all, is this productive or counterproductive? Because Nigerians don't seem to align themselves with the thinking of the organized labor.
Honestly, for this moment, it is counterproductive. So that let's call a spade a spade. Things are not working the way they ought to be working. And if you look at how much people are now scrambling to get some liters of fuel, it tells you that it is it is biting the masses so hard. The man who runs, I mean, the barbering salon, those who have some restaurants, how much do they have to kind of buy fuel to power their generators? And when, I mean, it does not affect the minister who is having some convoys here and there. It does not affect the bank executive who is just there watching the people on television, and you know, some people will even feel it's even time for me to go on break. Let me go on vacation. Why should it be so? But on the side of government, when there is an agreement that you're going to honor this, please do honor it so that we know that you are a government we can trust. And for labor, must it be that you win 100%? I think there has to be a point of a convergence so that there is always a give and take. Right. Government goes up, labor comes down, then they meet and we accept and we'll move forward.
Okay. Let's talk about the biggest story on the front page of the Daily Trust newspaper for today. I inherited serious assets and liabilities, is reported by Daily Trust. You can see that it cuts across most of the dailies this morning. Talk of liabilities from past administrations. I think this is rather on cue because we remember the Buhari administration for the first few months. They were telling us how bad the Goodluck administration or the PDP ruined the economy. We're hearing more of that now in part 2 from the Tinubu administration. What do you make of this route that people in power always take to explain why they are either unable to do something or why they are these persistent, challenges?
Yeah, you see, there is a difference. Now, when you have the screaming headline from my Daily Trust, I inherited serious liabilities from my predecessors. Now, you check some other newspapers, they'll add assets. So Daily Trust dropped the assets. But having said so, you also look at the president is careful to add S in the predecessors. Right. In other words, it's not just Buhari alone. Right. Goodluck Jonathan is involved, Obasanjo is involved, including maybe General Gowon, maybe.
Right.
But talking seriously, I think that when the CBN governor would just say immediately, no magic wand for economic crisis, it does not give us hope. I think he should have said no immediate magic wand. Right. Not that you just
do you think the choice of words also is indicative of something, that the words that they're choosing, that for him to say magic instead of immediate, do you think is telling something?
You see, as parents, when a child says he needs shoes, another one says we need meat pie, we need tea, we need all of that, the father is always giving the assurance, or the parents give the assurance, we will have it, we will have it. It's not saying, let me just give it now, we will have it. It gives hope to the children. But when we begin to talk of semantics, and you having a CBN governor who indeed should know, he's the engine room of this economy, when he said no magic wand, it's like there is that hopelessness. No, we want those in government to give us hope. Look, between today and tomorrow, I don't think there is a hope. But thereafter, there is a hope. But when you say there's just no magic wand, it is cast in stone, then why are you there? So I think that there are ways out of this. We've spoken about having agriculture, dry season farming. It is a way out. When we're talking of big currency notes, 1,000, 500 naira, 500 naira, all in circulation. They are the ones mostly in circulation. I mean, you are bound to say there's no magic wand. But when you reduce it, make it 200, 150 naira, they all are in circulation for the common man to get. Trading and all that would be easy. Now, you want to buy bitter cola that is just at 10 naira, then you don't have the 10 naira, you jack it up to 20 naira. That is inflation at the very basic level. I mean, this should be hindered a kind of. And when we're talking of liabilities, look at how many roads are pending. They all are waiting. And you look at even airport remodeling, remodeling of the Nigerian airports. They all are waiting. Then you look at the railway, they all are waiting. All these are liabilities. But yes, just pump in the money and we move on. Well, by the time you begin to say, okay, where's the money? I can see that they're saying that we are back as #1 in terms of Africa when we're talking of crude oil.
Isn't this the usual precursor for, say, you're putting an excuse in the fridge for when to use it? Because you can easily say this when something doesn't work out, isn't it? The liabilities of the past are one of the reasons why we are unable to do A, B, C, D, and E. I mean, we've heard this before, haven't we?
Yeah, we've heard it before and we'll continue to hear it. But what we are simply saying is, why are you there in the first place? You knew all of this. It's not as if you have been ambushed. No one just walk you up to say, oh boy, take, these are your problems. No, you read all of that. You knew it before. I mean,
you campaigned on solving the problem.
You campaigned for it, and based on what you felt you would do for Nigerians, the Nigerians also felt, okay, this is a person we trust, this the government we trust, these are people we can form an alliance with. So by the time you reach there, you now say, oh boy, please, you can take away your ladder. There's no hope for you. I mean, you must show us that there is hope so that we move on ahead. We support you. But don't go there and tell us, no, there's just no hope. And there is hope. Because the youths are here, we all are ready. Try and stop the farmer herders clashes, and I tell you there is hope. There's always a magic wand for all of this.
The CBN announced the continuation or the indefinite use of the old 500, 200, and 1,000 naira notes indefinitely. What are your thoughts about it, especially in light of how close we are to the deadline, which is December 10, I believe, according to the Apex Bank order?
Yeah, you see, government is all about pronouncements. You can wake up 2 days to the time and say, look, continue using your currency, new or old. Just continue using them. Because when Nigerians begin to
does it make sense, you know, with the whole indefinite? Because we know it cannot be indefinite. I don't know any country that has 2 different versions of the same note. I don't know if you know it. I mean, you're obviously well traveled. Do you know of any country that has 2 different color 1,000 naira, 2 different versions of 500 naira, 2 different versions of 200 naira notes?
There was this time America did some little redesign of some. Those ones were so much in circulation, and they don't make all these recalls the way we do. They all were moving side by side till one.
I mean, for the US dollar, you can imagine it's a reserve currency. So there's always a demand for it.
But when you also look at it, like we are told, they said it costs so much money to print. It costs so much money to mint. Therefore, I think that for a time being, in my own elementary economics, we cannot just be rushing, change this at the detriment of the Nigerian, especially in the villages. What we want is, I keep saying, let us have smaller denominations. I'm calling this and I'm emphasizing this. We cannot be flaunting 1,000 naira notes here and there. There was a time some people were even saying that we should have 5,000 naira note. I mean, what kind of economy are we going to be having? I remember somebody, when we were in Germany, somebody gave me 10 trillion Zimbabwean pounds. I said, oh, this is bigger than the Nigerian dollar. But when we looked at it, it could only buy a loaf of bread.
Sure.
So we cannot march towards that Zimbabwean currency.
Very briefly, as we wrap up, the presidential candidate of the PDP, former Vice President Atiku Abubakar, is calling for another merger of opposition parties to put up a big fight against the APC going forward. What do you make of it? Very briefly.
Yeah, you see, you can do a merger now as opposition without election. But when the elections come, you're all going to be to scatter. We expect that they should have formed the merger as a formidable force to contest against APC. But after the election, you are now talking of a merger. I think...
all right. It doesn't 2027 looks far away, but it also feels like it's just around the corner. So we'll wait and see. I mean,
so campaigns have started?
Probably. Who knows? Mr. Ben Sherman, thank you very much, as always, for your sage analysis. Appreciate you for joining us on Daybreak, as always. Thank you most kindly.
Always a great pleasure.
Right. And this is where we draw the curtains on today's edition of the program.